so fabulous, right? For those of you that were walking in during the film, like, it's all good, right? But the film was fantastic. So I definitely want to shout out the filmmakers and shout out Shantrelle P. Lewis, who's in the back in the house. We're about to transition now to our panel discussion that's going to explore a lot of the topics and themes that were relevant in the film and also in the book. And the moderator for this conversation is Rashid Shabazz, the VP of Communications from the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. He's going to come up and give us short bios for each of the speakers and then jump off the conversation. Thank you. I'm Alicia. Hi.
Good evening. Wow. How do we start? Such an amazing evening that we're about to start right now. My name is Rashid Shabazz. I'm with the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. It is my honor tonight to host and be a sponsor of this event to honor Shantrelle Lewis's amazing book. Dandelion, the Black Dandy Street Style. This is also, I want to thank the Brooklyn Museum and Aperture Foundation, and particularly Alicia Boone particularly for allowing us to be here this evening. I also want to just say that this is not our first time in partnership with Aperture and the Brooklyn Museum. Back in 2011, 2012, we partnered with them around another project called Question Bridge Black Males. And so I'm happy that we're continuing the partnership and relationship. After watching the film, all my thoughts and everything that I had hoped to talk about just reconfigured itself. So I want you to be patient with me. But one of the things that I was thinking about is just how beautiful Black people are. And just... And Black people, you know, we're, as an African people, as Black people, we're trendsetters, we're originators, we sample, we remix again, we appropriate, we take, and then we recreate, and then we also put back into the world constantly. And one thing that is so valuable, I think it was Shantrelle, and tonight we're going to get a slice of just one Black existence because we're so multifaceted as Black people, but this idea of the dandy, I think for Shantrelle, and I don't want to speak for her, she will speak later, is so rooted in love and Black love. And so I want to start there, and I want to welcome the speakers and panelists for tonight. I want to first ask to come to the stage Ignacio Quales. Quiles. Quiles, as he corrected me. And he's a trendsetter himself, multifaceted, haberdasher. He is a model. He's also a designer. He's also run his own vintage shop for a long time. He's also an elder to a number of individuals in this space. And so we want to thank him. Can we give a round of applause? Next, I would like to ask if Darnell L. Moore will come to the stage. And many of us, yes, let's give it up for Darnell. Darnell is editor-at-large at Cassius and One Digital Platform. He is formerly a senior editor and correspondent at Mike. And for the time I've known Darnell, I think the most important thing about him is not only his love for Black people, but he's been a voice and advocate for Black Lives Matter, as well as the LGBT community. So can we give him a round of applause again? I would like to ask Abiola Oke to come to the stage. Abiola is CEO and publisher of OK Africa. OK Africa connects a global audience to the African content through compelling content and high-profile cultural events. And prior to OK Player, he's a recovering Wall Street. I don't know if he's recovering, but I almost feel like I don't need to read her bio. Everyone in this room probably knows who Shantrelle is. But I will say she's worked on this project for so long, and before I sit down, I know this has been a labor of love for her, and I'm just very thankful to Aperture Foundation for seeing the value in bringing this book to life, a journey that began so long ago here in Brooklyn and seated here. And for those who don't know, Shantrelle is a curator, she's a researcher, she's a lover of culture. She's done so much for so many. She's also the author or writer of this book. And she's, most importantly, in addition to all those things, she's a Howard grad. There's always Howard in the house, so I had to give Howard a shout out. And then there's, in addition to that, she's also a graduate of Temple University. So not to belabor this, I'm going to take my seat and begin this conversation. Thank you. So I'm going to be selfish because I know people are going to get the opportunity to speak with you. But I think this works. This image right here. So if you have not gotten the book, I think there's some books on sale this evening. There's only a limited edition of the books that have been printed, so you should try to get your copy. And there's only a limited edition here tonight, and I think there's about 500 people here, so I think there's 100 books. So I'm just letting you know. So this picture here, we pulled out the book, and I want Shantrelle to tell the story of why this book is so important. She tells the story in the book, but for those who don't know, this is her brother, Sanford. And so, Shantrelle, I want you to tell us the journey that you've taken, and I'm gonna click through the pictures, but I want to sit here for a second with your brother.
I'm a little emo right now, so y'all have to bear with me. I have to start by saying Mafedafon Egon, Mafedafon Shango, Kawo, Kabiosile. I had to get that out. Mafedafon Yemonja, Mafedafon Obatala, Mafedafon Oshun, Mafedafon Alegba. I am here on the backs and the shoulders of my ancestors. And Risha that guided me, so I had to get that out. This handsome young man is my little brother. Some of you in the audience have the pleasure of having met Stanford, who actually did not like the name Stanford because he made him feel like an old man, a young black boy growing up in New Orleans with this very old man. But Stanford came into this world as an old man, right? Old man, like he's older than me. I'm like, boy, you know you my little brother, right? Y'all know I'm from New Orleans. In case you didn't know, you will find out tonight. Les bon temps roulés. So, growing up in New Orleans, this old man comes out of my mother and is obsessed with dress. His suits, his Kenneth Coles. I mean, dude had like a line of Kenneth Coles, like polished, in his closet. Nobody could touch his Kenneth Coles, right? It was a source of pride for him. And I mean, his Kangol and his bow ties, and that was just like so taken with how my little brother was so committed to dress. And even in the book, I talk about a time for my debutante ball, because, you know, those of us black folks in the South, just a little bougie, not too much, just a little. Particularly in New Orleans, you know, we make our debut, we come out. So I'm at my debutante ball with my, you know, wedding gown on, being presented. And we're taking these family shots, and Stanford, the photographer, has him to kneel because he's the youngest, right? Dude was mad about it. Like, you got me kneeling in my good suit? I mean, he was just, his face was all frowned up, like, in a photo, and, I mean, that's my brother, right? And even when the exhibition exhibition opened in Chicago, Stanford walks in with this I didn't even know it was him. I just saw this sharp-dressed brother with this hat on. I'm like, dang, that brother look good. I wasn't checking him out like that because I had a man, my husband at the time. But I'm just saying, dude was dressed sharp, right? And then he turns around, it's my little brother, and so that, that's my entree into this world of dandyism, growing up as a black girl, middle class, in New Orleans, being surrounded by these glorious examples of black men in my family, and Stanford, is one of them.
And so this is the one picture from his
First communion. We
His
were
first
Catholic. Prior to me being a Shango priest, I was a good Catholic girl. Good old Christian Catholic girl, like my mama tried to remind people. You know she was Catholic, right? She grew up in the church.
and this and this beautiful couple here.
This is my grandfather's sister, Mama June, the late Mama June Ibaye, and her husband, Uncle Robert, my great uncle, who, I just have to tell y'all, Mama June and Uncle Robert, so they're married. I go to the house in Elgis. Mama June is like telling me, well, what your mama doing? What your grandma cook? And what your this one cook? While he's telling me, yeah, and I was in the Congo and I knew Patrice Lumumba. And she's looking at him, rolling her eyes, and she's like, yeah, so what you said your mama cooked again? That's Uncle Robert and Mama June. And, to this day, Uncle Robert, gets sharply dressed. I mean, even though he just sits in front of the television watching the news, arguing about politics, this is Uncle Robert, 80-something years later, so.
Well, thank you. I want to briefly dive into the idea of the dandy. And so I pulled this image because I think it captured some of where I want to take us in the next 20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Ignacio and you talk about this sartorial journey that we take. So I want to ask you, what is a dandy? Just so for those who may not know by now what a dandy is from the film, I want you to say what your idea of a dandy is, but I want to turn to Ignacio to share his journey and also talk about this idea of the dandy.
So I have to shout out Hanif Abdul Rahim, who actually photographed this image. There were 14 photographers who were in the inaugural exhibition, and so this was like the hallmark photograph from the first iteration of the exhibition. And I think this speaks to the quintessential black dandy, right? Is a black man, a man of African descent, or woman, or someone who doesn't fit in that binary, who takes European, a sharply cut suit and Africanizes it. And so a black dandy is a trickster. He or she is a rebel. He or she is someone who is very clever and very conscious and political about how they get dressed and how they're showing out and showing up in the world when they're walking down the street, because they're very conscious of how people are perceiving them. They're also someone who finds immense pleasure, to shout out my 20, Joan Morgan, who talks about pleasure a lot. They find so much pleasure, or they get pleasure from how they dress, right? And I think that's something that's very African. It's something that's in us in terms of it's beyond respectability, because there's lots of respectability rooted in dandyism. But in today's contemporary context, I think we forget about us as an African people. Like before we even we're in contact with white people, we were getting dressed up, and we were doing it for ourselves. And so even in the absence of whiteness, we're still dressing up, we're still regal, we're still beautiful, we're still powerful, we're still making statements, whether spiritual or political, with how we dress ourselves. And so for me, that is what the dandy is doing. He's taking something like those jazz musicians in New Orleans did with jazz. They took European instruments and they created something entirely new, because we're always innovating as a people. And that's what black dandies are doing today.
Ignacio, you and I had a conversation that was very informative, and I want you to share a little bit about your journey. But in the film, there was a moment where they're talking about how you dress. And I also, at some point, we'll get to Darnell talking about this as well, because I think it's relevant. But the idea that dress can either save your life or you can be killed based on what you're wearing. Now, I think there's a lot to unload. It's a little problematic to really think about that. But in the moment of Black Lives Matter, in a moment where we know Trayvon Martin in a hoodie symbolized so much for so many to get organized. Can you share a little bit of your journey and then also contextualize that statement that you were having in the film?
Well, growing up, of course, growing up in the so-called hood, and that's another word appropriated from us. It's really neighborhood, but by the use of just the word hood, it creates an image of hoodlum or a hood of lums, you know? So I fight that word. I call it a neighborhood. I don't call my place a hood. I call it a neighborhood. So just to start from that premise, it's a long sartorial journey. And I know, like a lot of you, I've made the mistake of putting on the wrong outfit or not matching it well or not wearing the right suit or not wearing the right tie or like things like. So, you know, we make all these mistakes, and that's part of the enjoyment. But beyond that, this great suit or the great pair of shoes that you wear, it's a long sartorial journey, but there's value, there's a power that comes with that cloth. Like style is resistance, like the zoot suit. In LA, they did it as resistance, but yet they still look good because there's a power in that cloth. But with that power comes a great responsibility as to how you're supposed to behave. The hip-hop style of the baggy pants doesn't have any power in the sense that it doesn't open doors. Like when I was a kid, I think I've shared this with a lot of people, and I used to play with my friends. Like I would dress up and say, I'm going to walk into that building, and they're going to open the door for me. They're going to let me in. Like, no, they're not. I'm like, what? And oh, sir, can I help you? And I showed them. I said, see, I'm dressed like this, and you're dressed like that. You go to the door and see what happens. Because it does put a value on us. We've always had a value put on us. From before slavery, we had a value. And then when we got emancipated, we still had a value because our vote didn't count, so we had to be 3/4. So they added that value to us. And then if we don't look the part, you know, like my mom would say, don't go out with those pants, you know, wrinkled, or that shirt wrinkled, you know. It was an image that your family instilled in you. Like I grew up in Harlem, so I got to see the Sunday parade of people. And I got to see people that worked at night, because a lot of the people did work at night. But during the daytime, oof, hot steppers, looking really good, dressed to the nines. And again, but that took years, and it's a long journey, and we adapt, and we get ourselves to that point. And I started with, like many of these kids in South Africa, I started with thrift items. My mom was a seamstress, so I sewed and I took things apart and I reinterpreted them to fit my body, like Boateng was talking about how the pants didn't fit our butts, basically, you know. You know, and that's usually a problem area for most men of color and Latino men as well, represent my Latino brothers and sisters, you know. But again, we had to readapt and claim European and then fit it to our African bodies, which is very different. And anybody that knows when they got a suit made and you notice your backside gets a little bit more fabric because we're a little bigger in those areas. So a lot of mistakes, a long journey. I'm a fan of the well-dressed man. And whether it is leisure style, this mashup that you have, which is amazing, and I told you this before, and it's interpretation and bringing back, but it's also bringing to the forefront that this is something that we always did. If you look at the 60s, when people marched, and I would look at that and I'd say, man, these people are marching out there, and they look so good, but they're going to get beat up, and they got that nice suit on, and they're walking proud. Why? It was giving us an image. Like, I am just like you. I'm no different than you. And I'm showing you because I'm wearing my best, my Sunday best, on this trip where I'm going to get chased by dogs, beat up, but there's a power in it. It's a style, it's resistance. It's like, I am not going to bow down to you. And I'm not going to bow down to anything. I'm going to keep going forward, and I'm going to look my best as I go forward.
Thank you. know Darnell has a lot he probably wants to say. So, Darnell, I want, because I think Shantrelle has said something earlier in terms of dress being political. And I think that probably the most political thing we've probably seen in a long time is Luke Cage, right? Because then you could wear anything and still survive a bullet. But the reality is, it's not, no matter what you're wearing, we are black people, and that we're going to face certain challenges despite how we look, though there are instances, though there are these moments. I'm curious, based off of your journey and where you are and where you're representing, responding to Ignacio, but also thinking about dress as a political way to shape gender, reconfigure it, but also think about it from the standpoint of how we see ourselves as a people.
Sure. I love this idea about style or fashioning oneself as being a form of resistance, sartorial practices being a form of resistance. The first thing I'll say about Black dandyism and what I think it does as a form of resistance, as an intervention, is unbind this notion that class, and by class I mean like the notion of classic man or classic person, respectable. It removes that idea from the notion of whiteness. So we think about class, or we think about respectability through the gaze of like white supremacy and bourgeois aesthetics. That is to say, to dress classy or to dress respectable is to look like the classic man, which is to look like the white bourgeois respectable man with money in his pocket. Black people refashioning themselves or resisting or sort of, to use a word, I was going to cuss, but I ain't going to do that, and I know everybody's politics in here, but playing with or toying with those styles is a way of repositioning that.
Well, like the
But I want to also think about this in a different way. It is also to say that thuggishness or the thug is not easily mapped onto black people or the hood. Because if that were the case, the thuggery of, let's say, I don't know, the drone attacks coming from the White House, or the thuggery of Trump, or the thuggery of white people or bourgeois class on Wall Street, these folk are dressed in suits. So this is a way for us to This is a way Black dandyism is challenging us to unbind these notions from race and class and asking us to reconsider how our definitions and ideas and representations and perceptions of class, of classicness, of respectability are so shaped by a white imaginary that tells us that anything that isn't white, that does not have money, is not classy. Which is to say, the most thuggish thing I've seen is America in the White House, regardless of who's in it. The other thing I'll say then is I come from the hood, and I'm reclaiming that term as a person from Camden, New Jersey, as a person who spent a lot of time in Newark, New Jersey, who learned dandyism in Newark. First haberdasheries I went to were in Newark, New Jersey. The first time I got bow ties made there. And it's interesting, the first time I even modeled in a dandy campaign was under the guise of a black woman dandy named Kate Ross. In so many ways, what dandyism does is also unmaps this idea that that masculinity is solely the domain of male bodies. This is also, Kate Ross is a woman, a cisgender woman who dons bow ties, and it allows us to manipulate and maneuver through the gendered ideas that we're told we're supposed to follow. Those are also the products of a white racial supremacist patriarchal understanding of how we ought to adorn ourselves. When I adorn myself, it is every time any of us adorn ourselves, it's outright, it's political.
style of resistance.
I'm able to sort of mess around with gendered ideas based on how I stylize myself. I will say the danger of these ideas of dandyism that we carry is this. I knew when I was in Newark that if I wore a bow tie and a suit in certain circles, it made me legible in a certain way. It caused people within the community, when I was working in politics and organizing, to actually read me as having a type of political and social capital. That is to say, they understood me as the right type of black man walking into the room, even if I was gay.